On today's episode, we have a college professor who was actually stalked by one of her students.
Most of the stories I read are about students victimizing other students or teachers victimizing students. Rarely do I hear stories about students victimizing teachers. You know, being an educator is tough enough right now, but I can only imagine looking back and wondering if any of my former teachers have ever been stalked by one of their students.
Her story covered a lot of things I didn't expect.
And I don't know how it's possible for someone to not see 8 years, 3 states, and a marriage later's worth of advances from a person you never knew as threatening, right? Like, well, he's threatened to love you, but not to hurt you. And I find that really problematic. I'm scared.
I'm Jaimie Beebe.
And I'm Jake Deptula. On today's episode of Strictly Stalking, we're chatting with Cassandra, a university professor who was stalked by one of her students.
While attending one of her classes, a student became obsessed with Cassandra and attempted to date her.
She told him that she didn't want a personal or social relationship with him outside of class, but then he found her office hours and class schedule online and showed up randomly to see her.
After she moved away to a new town, he followed her and continued to pursue her.
Now she's working to educate her students about the crime of stalking and wants to connect with lawmakers to amend interstate stalking laws to protect future victims. Cassandra, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for the wonderful work that this program is doing.
Absolutely, we appreciate that. So tell us a little about yourself.
So I am a professor at a university here in South Carolina, and I study and teach about communication. And so we focus on topics like interpersonal communication, family communication, persuasion. And I love teaching and feel really grateful to be able to be one of the people in life that gets to live my dream.
How did you get into teaching?
I actually did a year of community college and decided that college and university wasn't for me. And I moved overseas. I'll never forget the day I told my parents that I'm leaving in 2 months and I'm moving to Australia and I'm not going to college anymore. And I'm going to go over there and work for this nonprofit. And I ended up there for 5 years. And in that time, I was given the opportunity to teach health education seminars to students all over the country in Australia, and then do some work in and out of Southeast Asia as well. And it was in that process that I discovered how much educating and teaching people to really harness the skill of communicating with others and what that can do for them in their lives, how much that really mattered. And so for me, I thought, all right, well, I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to continue doing this. And I would have stayed in Australia forever, but I ran out of visas. And so I ended up coming back to the States and finished my undergrad. And then I got my master's. And this whole situation started after I moved to Wisconsin for my PhD.
Tell us how you met your stalker.
He was a student in my undergraduate interpersonal communication class in the fall of 2012. He was the average student. He was pretty quiet and unassuming. And to be honest, he never really stood out to me in the class. We had classes of around 25 students at that point. And I remember that he was always paying attention, he seemed like he was sort of always listening. But other than that, he never actually really stood out to me as a student.
When did he make his true feelings known to you?
He stopped coming to class, and he didn't show up for a major presentation that was due in the class that he needed to complete. And so I reached out to him, as I've done with many students before, to touch base and find out how he was doing and make sure everything was okay. That's something that we do as educators. And he ended up coming to my office hours, and he told me that because of mental health reasons, he didn't think he'd be able to pass the class. And so, of course, I encouraged him to stay in the class. I encouraged him to, stick it out and do what he could. And I told him, you have campus resources, and I directed him to the student counseling services and the other resources available on campus. And after that, I didn't hear from him until he emailed me. So he dropped the class. And then he emailed me after he dropped the class and thanked me and said, I can't, I'm not going to take you up on your offer to pass the class and to complete this assignment, but I just wanted you to know how meaningful your class has been for me. And he said a bunch of very kind things. And then he asked me out at the end of the email. And I had actually never had that happen before. And so I was sort of taken aback a little bit. And, I responded and said, thanks for your email. I'm flattered. I can't take you up on your offer, but I wish you the best of luck. And I thought that it would end there, but it didn't.
What happened next?
I started to get these series of emails from him, one right after the other. And they were very manic. It was very boom, 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 boom. And I could tell that basically he was emailing, and when I wasn't responding, within a couple hours, he was emailing again. And in those emails, he did a lot of asking me why I wouldn't take him up on his offer, telling me why he thought he was perfect for me, telling me that he'd initially been interested in another faculty member in our department, and he mentioned her by name, but that he realized after meeting me as his teacher that I was a better fit for him. And he essentially just continued to ask me out and send these emails, and a lot of them were incredibly erotomanic, so a lot of fantasizing and talking about really inappropriate things for a student to ever be talking to a professor about in terms of my appearance and what he thought about things. And so I ended up thinking to myself, okay, this is weird and awkward and uncomfortable, but I ended up responding to him and I said, look, you've now sent me 4 emails in a very short time. This has to stop. This is inappropriate. You're putting me in a very precarious position. Please restrict all communication moving forward to only things related to the class that you were enrolled in. And I didn't hear from him. And then he showed up to the final exam, even though he wasn't enrolled in the class. And that really, really unnerved me. And so I ended up chatting with another faculty member and going to our student advisor, and she looked him up in the system, and I explained to her what had happened, and she said, this guy has really complicated history. I can't talk to you about it because of FERPA regulations on college campuses, but he's got a complicated history. We need to contact the Dean of Students office, and they handle student conduct issues on campus. So the Dean of Students office reached out to him, and they apparently met. I didn't know this until years later, or a year and a half later, but they apparently met, and the Dean's office told him, stop contacting her or you're going to be expelled. So about a year and a half passes and I don't hear anything from him. I start thinking, that guy that had this weird crush or whatever. And so I'm teaching my classes again in a different university building on campus. And in the spring of 2014, I start to notice that he's in the hallway outside of my classroom. And I remember distinctly thinking, what a coincidence that this person would now have a class in the exact hallway I'm in. Like, how awkward is that? Don't make eye contact, don't pay attention to him, just pretend like you don't see him. And so that's what I did the times that I saw him that semester. And then on the last day of classes, I left my classroom after talking with some students, and he was standing in the hallway in a suit holding flowers. And I turned and started walking the other way, and he followed me outside and he called my name, and which was really unnerving to hear him call me by my first name. But he did. And I just turned around, and all I remember yelling is, not appropriate. Stop this now. This is not appropriate. It has to stop. And then I turned around and walked away. So I immediately called my best friend, and she told me, look, this is not a guy that has a crush on you. He's following you. You need to go to campus police. And I thought, he's a student. He's a mixed up kid. I didn't want to get him in any kind of trouble, but I went to campus police to report it, just for safety, to report it. And the detective at campus police spoke with him and talked to him and said that he actually wasn't a student anymore. And he hadn't been a student that semester. He'd found my schedule of classes online, and he was planting himself outside of my classroom. And that's how he found out where I would be. And so I felt really nervous. I mean, in his previous correspondence with me, in his emails, he had said that he had gone to my bus stop and then my office and then my bus stop. And of course, I'm like, how does he know where my bus stop is? That's really weird, and other things. And so I just thought, you know what, this is not okay. I need to do something about this. And the detective said, well, he was able to find you on Facebook. He and I were never Facebook friends. He was a student of mine. And we'd never had any conversation outside of the classroom, literally at all, other than that one time in office hours. And for some reason, he saw my profile on Facebook and he thought that that was an invitation to contact me. And so the police officer said, I think we should file for an order of protection, which in the state of Wisconsin, that's what it is. So we went to court and it was difficult and challenging, and I couldn't help but feel conflicted. As an educator, our job is to help humans grow and people grow. And so I couldn't help but feel conflicted for doing this, but I thought, obviously the expulsion threat was not enough. We need to address this. So I took him to court, and the judge felt that his correspondence with me and the fact that he had planted himself outside my classroom and then been looking at my schedule online was enough to warrant, and this is the first time I'd ever gone to court about it, to warrant the maximum restraining order in the state of Wisconsin. And so in Wisconsin, everything happened really quickly, really justly. I felt very protected, and I had one person with me the whole time, and that was the detective. And the detective went with me to file the paperwork. The detective went with me to court. It really was kind of the best case scenario for a victim of anything to go through. And so I felt protected and I felt good. Over time, the restraining order, was in place. And there were a few times over the next couple of years where gifts would show up at my door. One time flowers showed up. And I remember calling my boyfriend at the time, who I was actually dating when all of this started. He and I were already in a relationship when all this started. So he's now my husband. And I remember calling him and saying, thanks for the flowers. And, my boyfriend, now husband, said, I didn't send you any flowers. And could never figure out who they were from. And it's possible they weren't from him, but some baked goods showed up one time. The really alarming thing for me was that one night at my apartment, someone started banging on my living room window at my apartment. And I was too afraid to go to the window. And so I called the police, and they came and they said, we didn't see anybody. Nobody else saw anybody, but there are footprints outside your window. So we know someone was there. And I said, I have a restraining order against this person. And they said, do you want us to contact him and find out if it was him? And I said, I don't, because if you do, I don't want him, and it wasn't him, I don't want him thinking I'm thinking about him, because I, as a social scientist, have a really clear understanding that feeds into things. And so I said, you know what, it's fine. And after that, I ended up breaking my lease and moving in with my boyfriend, because I just couldn't, I didn't want to deal with it anymore. And so in 2015, I graduated, I finished my PhD, and I ended up going to California for my first tenure track position at a university there in San Luis Obispo. And during that time, everything seemed copacetic. I did get a call from the detective in Wisconsin in 2016 asking if I would be willing to lift the order of protection against him, because with that order of protection came a campus ban. So he was not allowed to be within 1 mile of the university in Wisconsin. And so he said his parents reached out. They really want him to go back to school. He's now, I think at this point, he would have been like 28 or something like that. He was a non-traditional student. So he was actually 25 when he was in my class. And I remember really battling, feeling so challenged in terms of, as an educator, I want this guy to be able to get a good education. I want him to grow as a human. I kept thinking we've all made mistakes. I wouldn't want to be defined by a series of poor choices, which is what I used to call it. And so I really, really battled that. But then I just thought, I can't have him doing this to someone else. I can't have him do this to another student. I can't have him do this to another faculty member. I need to keep this for as long as I can have it. And it's really rare that this happens for victims of stalking. So I'm just going to keep this. And so I ended up saying, no, not okay with it. So in 2017, I get married, and I get my dream job at a university in South Carolina that was hiring for someone that researches the things that I research, and it looked like a great fit for me, and I got the job. And so we moved here to South Carolina, and I honestly didn't think about it much after that. And then in May of 2018, my husband and I were sitting in the airport about to fly back to Wisconsin for a wedding. And ironically, that day, I get Facebook messages from this guy, and it's a new Facebook account that I haven't seen before. And he, one of the messages, he apologizes, which it was just bizarre because he literally messaged me the day the restraining order ended. And so someone at some point joked and said, what did he set a calendar reminder to contact you on the day this restraining order ended 4 years later? And so he was very apologetic, said he can't believe what he did to me. He really was a child then, and he didn't know what he was doing, and he's much better now, and he really was sorry, and he's sorry he put me through that. And then another message came, and that message said, I really did think I was going to marry you one day. And so I thought, and that ruined it. And I immediately, when we landed, contacted the Wisconsin detective that had been managing my case. And it ended up being a new detective that took it on. But basically what ended up happening was they asked, do you want to ask, do you want us to pursue a new restraining order against him? Do you want to ask for us to have it reinstated? And I said, he's apologizing. I talked to my best friend, I talked to my husband, and they were like, he's apologizing. Yeah, it's weird, but he's apologizing. Like, you shouldn't have said that, but he's apologizing. And so I ended up just saying, you know what? No, we live in South Carolina now. He doesn't know that. I have a new last name. And so there's just not really a reason to do that. But I do want you to tell him I do not want to hear from him. He's not to contact me again. So 5 months pass, and I'm in my office here in South Carolina at my university with one of my advisees, and I leave my office to go get a form for her to fill out, and I see this man standing in the hallway here in South Carolina, and I asked him, he had flowers, and I asked him, can I help you? Are you looking for someone? He looked a little confused, and then he spoke, and to this day, I can't remember what he said, but I knew it was him. And he looked really different, but I knew it was him. And so I said his name, and he smiled I'm sorry, y'all, this is really, and he smiled as though he was pleased that I remembered him. And I just remember thinking, yell, scream, get him out of here. This is what is going on. But instead, in a matter of seconds, I gathered myself and I thought, no, the police need to see him here. They need to see him in this hallway outside my office at a university 8 states away. And so I went into my office. I told him, I'll be with you in a couple minutes. I'm with a student right now. That's all I said. I went into my office and I scribbled on a piece of paper to that student, please keep talking about your fellowship. There's a person in the hallway I had a restraining order against. I need to contact the police. Please keep talking. And she was brilliant. She was brave. She was wonderful. She didn't skip a beat. She just kept talking about her fellowship. And I immediately texted a group of my colleagues from a thread earlier in the day and said, I have a former student stalker from Wisconsin who's standing in the hallway and I'm terrified. Please call the police immediately. And so within about 5 minutes or so, the campus police had shown up. So someone got that text and contacted the campus police, and they had shown up and they escorted him away. I never interacted with them. And then for about 5 hours, I sat in another department chair's office unraveling the whole story of everything that had happened prior to that. And, I had to interact with police, and then I had to interact with an advocate who was wonderful and a detective who was also wonderful. And everybody was pretty concerned. You never had a relationship with this guy, and he's come here, 2 states later, to see you. And I could tell that they were questioning. I could tell that maybe they didn't believe me, that this was literally only a person that I'd had 3 conversations with ever, and it was all related to school. And so, and 2 of those were in the classroom with other students. And so I just did what I could to explain everything. And they were like, yeah, this is weird. We need to figure it out. And so, the captain of the campus PD comes in to the office and he sits down cool as a cucumber. And I can tell that he's done this 1,000 times before. And he looks at me and he's, as if to say, like, they're there, it'll be okay. And he says, I want you to know that he's down in the police car, and I told him in no uncertain terms, I said, son, look, you are not to have contact with her. I don't know what the 2 of you had, but she doesn't want to see you anymore. And I was livid. So I work as a volunteer victims advocate for our local rape crisis center. And I immediately got angry because not only did this captain not take the time to investigate and ask questions about what the history was, he automatically assumed we had been in a romantic relationship. But he also fed into this guy's delusions, because this is an obsessive, delusional stalker. This is not someone I ever had any social relationship with. And so I got really upset and ended that conversation, spoke with the detectives. It turned out that he had driven there. He lied to the police at first and said he flew, and that he had just come from the airport. And it turned out he actually had driven to my city, and he ended up renting a place here, and he had gotten a job at a hotel, and he'd been here for a week before he had made contact with me. So nobody knows what he was doing during that time, but he'd been here for a week. And so I just said, I don't care what the process is. I need to get an order of protection. I can't do this. And so my husband, we hired an attorney. My husband went with the attorney to court, and the judge found that there was grounds for a restraining order. And so he granted the restraining order. And I'm really grateful that we had the resources to do that, because a lot of people don't. And so I ended up having to go through the motions of telling my colleagues, hey, there's this person. I need you to know that we didn't have a relationship. Not that should matter, but a former student showing up at your office, a lot of implications come from that. And I did not want people thinking that something had happened with this student previously, because it hadn't. And so I still was on the tenure track. I didn't have a permanent position yet like I do now. And so I was very nervous about all of this. It was really disruptive. And so about a month passes and I don't hear anything, though they had told me what kind of car he drives and the license plate. And I saw it a few times, parked outside an apartment complex 3 blocks from my gym. And so, which is about 20 minutes from campus. And so I knew he was still in town, and I just, avoid, change up your routine, do all the things that are recommended. And then in December, he violated the restraining order and he contacted me. And he said that he had been creeping on my he wrote that he'd been creeping on my faculty profile, and that he had seen that I took my picture and my office hours down. And then he said, I hope I didn't frighten you. I would never want to do that. And he told me that because of what I study as a professor, I study young adult decision-making, and I study advocacy and self-advocacy through communication, and specifically through advice. And he said, I think that there are things that you can help me with, given what you research. And I just really need to talk to you. I really need to talk to you. And he asked me to call him. And he said, I know I'm violating the restraining order by contacting you. So I immediately contacted the advocate and the detective. And things didn't happen here as quickly as they did in Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, the same day, I was able to get a temporary order of protection against him. Well, they don't do temporary orders here, particularly when there's not violence involved. And so I had to wait for them to file with the magistrate's court. I had the restraining order at the time, but basically, the detective didn't go and talk to him until the next day. And then it was a day or two before he even came back to court, and the judge issued a warrant for him to come back to court. And all of this happened in the magistrate's court, as it often does. No criminal charges had been brought against this guy, despite my asking multiple times how to file criminal charges. I was told all we can do is trespass him from campus. And I said, well, what about when I'm off campus? And they said, there's nothing we can do about that. And I said, well, can't he get a stalking letter so that if he contacts me ever again, criminal charges of stalking will be brought against him? And the captain said, he hasn't stalked you here. I said, what do you mean? The captain said, it has to be a pattern, repeated behavior. He's only contacted you once here in South Carolina. So I thought the second time when he violated the order, that might count, but it didn't. They didn't file any charges. No letter was ever given to him telling him if you contact her again, you're going to be charged with stalking. It's called a stalking letter here. And so I was pretty upset. And the judge said, look, she needs to come to court this time. The clerk called the advocate, who said, you really need to come and actually be present in court this time, not just have an attorney. And so I had to show up and I had to be in a room with him. And he was awkward and quiet, and he was meek and unassuming and barely uttered a few words, barely answered the judge's questions. And I could tell that the judge was getting frustrated. And the judge finally said, look, I don't know what to do for you. You're not helping yourself. You violated this. You never had a relationship with her. She is a married woman. Her husband's sitting there right next to her. This has to stop. And that narrative always bothered me, because being a married woman has nothing to do with it. he shouldn't be doing this to anyone. It shouldn't matter that I'm married. He shouldn't be doing this to anyone. And so, he said all these things, and then he told him, I'm finding you in contempt of municipal court. You're going to be in jail for 10 days. And so he was jailed for 10 days. And my understanding is he stuck around for about a month after that. And then through contact amongst all the people involved, I found out from the detective in Wisconsin that his dad had driven down here and basically forced him to go back to Wisconsin. And so they contacted his parents, and at that point, he's a 31-year-old man, and his parents are coming down to get him and take him back to Wisconsin. And so for a couple months, things felt okay. And then I opened my Facebook one morning in the spring of 2019, and I have a series of unread messages. Probably about 100 messages on Facebook Messenger that I'd never seen before. And they weren't all from him. They were from lots of different people. And I didn't understand how I had never seen those messages on Facebook before, because I'm on Messenger and I was using Facebook and everything was private. And I don't accept people that I don't know. I don't friend people I haven't met in person. I've never done that. So 28 of those messages are from him. And they say things, they were intense, and it was really clear that they were sent from a manic space. And in them, he talked about how he thinks that I can educate him, how he thinks he has a long way to go and a lot to learn, but that he's a quick study, and that, he could learn from me really quickly and to be my exemplary husband. And he details what a fantasized life with me would look like. He talks about how he'd be great for our children, talks about how he's come into some money recently. And he even says, you take precedence over everything else, and it makes me sick to my stomach to think that I could never see you again. And it really drove it home when in the very last message of that manic series, he said, you are my idol and I only want good things for you. And then he said, yours adoringly forever. And he signed his name. So I immediately thought, well, now we got him. Now this guy has really done it. And then I looked at the dates. And somehow they were dated from August and September of 2018. And I had never received them, never seen them. And so and a bunch of other messages from other people. And so somehow something glitchy happened with Facebook when they changed to a new platform in the spring of 2019. And some messages ended up in my inbox that never should have been there. And they looked new. I'd never seen them or read them before. And I couldn't respond to them and I wouldn't have, but it said on the bottom, you can't respond to this person is blocked. And so even my husband was like, well, how did this happen? What is going on? And we contacted the platform, never heard back from them. And so we don't really know what happened, but we contacted the advocate, and the advocate said, look, because these are dated from before he came, there's nothing that we can do about it now, which made sense. And they said, let's take it to your hearing for your continuance of the restraining order in October. So October of last year, we go back to court, and I finally ended up just getting rid of my Facebook account. I deactivated it, and we go back to court, and I filed for a continuance of the restraining order. It was a hot mess. The first hearing I showed up for, and he ended up having not been served. And so I asked the judge, can I have a temporary continuance since the order's now ended? You guys set the hearing for the date that it ended. And now, because he has not been served, we have to wait 3 weeks for him to get served and have a right to be here. And the judge said, no, we don't do that. And so I had to go unprotected during that time. And I remember asking the judge, well, if he contacts me, will he get a stalking letter? Can I bring charges against him if he contacts me during the time this restraining order lapses? And the judge said, well, he's not here. Nobody here can press any charges against him. They have to do that in Wisconsin. And I said, I talked to the detective in Wisconsin this morning who spoke with the DA there. And the DA said that because I, the victim, am here, I have to do this here. And so you're telling me they need to do it in Wisconsin. They're telling me I need to do it here. And meanwhile, I have no protection. And the judge was not very happy about that, but he basically said, look, there's nothing I can do. He has a right to face his accuser before I reinstate this restraining order. And so they served him with the typical paperwork, and it says on there that he's not required to show up to the hearing. If he doesn't show up, he just forfeits, his defense, and so the restraining order would be reinstated. And he comes. The guy flew in again to attend this hearing, and I had to be there with him again. And so we sat there. My husband sat between us. The two tables in this courtroom are literally 10 feet apart. And my husband just said, the whole time he was staring at you, and I tried to block him from seeing you. And it was just a really unsettling, disturbing encounter. And so that was October of last year, and since that time, I've received a lot of things that, I can't say are from him. I can't, because it's not identified as him. And so I don't know if it's been him trying to contact me. I have a couple times reached out to my local detective, and my detective and my advocate here were brilliant. They were amazing. Despite this system not being very victim friendly, they really were like, this guy's not okay. Something's wrong, and this needs to get dealt with. And so I just found out last week when I went to apply for another continuance that the judge considered it, and he denied my application for a continuance because this former student, who is now my stalker, didn't violate the restraining order to the court's knowledge this year. So in a few weeks, I am officially without protection.
Cassandra, do you know of any other people that he stalked during this time? Did you unearth anything else during this whole process?
So there, to my knowledge, based on what the detective in Wisconsin and the detective here in South Carolina said, there is no record, there's no civil or criminal file from him as an adult in any of those states that indicate that this has been a problem for him before. And so it's challenging because I don't doubt he's done this with other people. I doubt that they have had the presence and wherewithal to deem it inappropriate so quickly and to deal with it so quickly and determinedly. And so those are the people I'm concerned for. But there's nothing that's out there that the detectives have been able to find that indicates that this has ever been a problem for him before me or since me. And again, I don't know what was in his file in that, in his campus file at the university up there that made the student advisor say, this is complicated, we need to contact dean of students, this guy's got some history. And so whatever has happened with him, there was something that the university had on file that made them feel that they needed to take swift action. And so to answer your question, no, that we're aware of.
What were you able to find out about him, about his home life, about maybe his parents or his past? So
the detective in Wisconsin actually asked him, why did you wait a year and a half to reach out to her again? Like, the dean told you that you'd be expelled, and then why did you start looking for her online again and start putting yourself outside her classes? And he said that, he'd waited a year and a half because he had surgery, I guess. And I didn't know that at the time. I actually found that out last year when I was filing for the continuance. I got files, and all the files talked about these things. There were several things I didn't know. Apparently his family, I guess that is for a while, the detective in Wisconsin and the detectives here couldn't get a hold of his parents, and their last known address, nobody was there. And they couldn't find his parents. It was probably, I want to say, at least 2 months before anyone in Wisconsin or here could actually locate his parents. And so, and they are divorced, or they were going through a divorce or something else. And so my understanding is that there's been a lot happening in his world. As an educator, when a student comes to you and says, I'm really struggling and I don't think I can pass your class, all you really want for that student is for them to get what they need and what you can do for them, to pass the class. And we are often faced with having to manage students' personal lives that they bring into the classroom with them and into their education with them. And I think that student brought whatever background he had and whatever was happening at the time in. And the manic nature of his emails, the one right after the other, as if he can't stop himself, and then long gaps in between in communication, I think he needs help.
How did your then boyfriend, now husband, handle all of this?
He's been incredible. He's been with me since the beginning. We were dating a few months when it started, and now here we are. And his role is to be supportive when he can. I think he's very concerned for my safety. He can't be here all the time because of work, and that makes him really upset. And so I think for him, it's been hard to watch me go through it. Again, he just calls the guy creepy, and my husband's awesome, but he says things like, "Gosh, that judge was so frustrating," and I'm the advocate that's like, no, that I'm infuriated. I'm not frustrated. I'm infuriated. That judge is not listening to me. And, and I feel very lucky because I have his wonderful support. I have several very close friends that know what's going on, and I have their support. My family knows a little bit. They know that there's an issue with a former student, and I have their support. I think what's really challenging is that I feel like there's nothing I can do right now. And he sees that, and he knows that's hard for me. And so that's hard for him. I am concerned for him. I'm concerned he's going to kill my husband. I'm concerned that all of the things that we hear about, see about, I'm concerned that this isn't done, and that he now has been in court maybe two or three times in a room with my husband, and he knows what he looks like, and I'm concerned about those things. And so my husband handles it in stride. Meanwhile, I stay balled up like Mr. Messy.
Are you worried that he'll also harm you?
Yes, I fear for my safety, and this has been a source of contention. So I've heard on your show, and also, being very familiar with different laws that require restraining orders and orders of protection, that really the issue is who gets to determine reasonable fear, because most of the statutes for stalking around the country mention reasonable fear would cause a victim to have and experience a reasonable amount of fear for their safety, the safety of their property, the safety of their loved ones. And what really sucks about the system is that the judges and the DAs get to determine my level of reasonable fear and a victim's level of reasonable fear. And I find that unacceptable, because I'm really scared for my safety, and I am really scared for the safety of my husband. Sorry. For a while, I was scared for my job, but I now have job security. And so, yes, I am afraid that he is going to hurt me. And what's challenging is that his words have never said that. And so at one point, someone in law enforcement, I can't remember who it was, but someone said to me, well, he's never threatened you. He's never threatened to hurt you. Like, he's just said how much he loves you. And I don't know how it's possible for someone to not see 8 years, 3 states, and a marriage later's worth of advances from a person you never knew as threatening, right? Like, well, he's threatened to love you, but not to hurt you. And I find that really problematic. I'm scared.
At what point did you start telling other friends and family about this, and how did they react?
So other than the faculty member in my department up in Wisconsin, and then the Dean of Students Office, the faculty advisor, I didn't talk to any of I had my best friend, and that was it, and my boyfriend at the time. And those were the people I talked to about it. I didn't tell my family, I didn't tell anyone. It wasn't until I found out that he wasn't a student anymore, and he'd been placing himself outside my classes, that my family came to find out. And they came to find out because they were like, I went to a family reunion, and they were like, you're not okay. This isn't the you we know. This isn't what's going on in your life. And so I had to tell them. And it's weird and it's awkward. And then when he showed up here, I had to tell them, make sure you're checking your Facebook profiles, make sure there's this, make sure there's that. And so I have been along the way very private about this. I am tired of hiding from a person that should be held as accountable as I am for his actions. And I don't have the luxury of, not that it's easy at all, because it's not, but I can't just pick up and leave. As faculty members at universities have to be hiring for the exact thing that we study in the area that we focus on and concentrate in with our own PhDs. And so I can't just willy-nilly apply to another university. I have to start all over again from the bottom, try and regain that permanent position. And there is no way for me to hide from him, because faculty members at universities are required to have faculty profiles so that students can find the faculty member's office to meet with them in the hours that the faculty member has set aside to guide and assist students. It's a part of the university culture. Now, my university administration has been great. And until recently, they were fine with me not having a picture up, and they were fine with me not listing my office hours. And so I make students sign up ahead of time for those, so I know who's coming. And but a lot of places might not be as understanding. And so there's just a lot that's enabling him. And I know that that's not what the universities would want. But I can't not have a faculty profile. And anywhere I go, that faculty profile is going to be there. So other than legally changing my name, which I shouldn't have to do, I just don't see much that I can do. He's going to know where I am. And so I just have to be astute enough to recognize and stay on guard. And if any good has come from this, it's that I've been able to research a lot about stalking. It's definitely informed the work that I do with advocacy and as a victim service provider for our local center, and also to be able to acknowledge for students immediately. I teach about the dark side of interpersonal communication in my classes now. And in my family communication class, we talk about what happens when well-meaning and intended individuals engage in questionable behavior at the end of a relationship, and what kinds of things people need to be doing to recognize these behaviors and to help themselves. And I think that some universities are doing an excellent job of educating students about this. Other universities need to do better. And I would say that most universities need to do better about training faculty for how to handle this. Where do you go when there's a problem? I never felt as much like a student as I did in that moment. I had no clue who to talk to when he showed up. And so I had to talk to my boss, who had to talk to his boss, the dean, who had to talk to, the provost. And it just goes up the line until you figure out where it's supposed to get managed.
What would be some advice that you'd give other educators to recognize when a student's manipulating their attention for more of a personal relationship? So
I think that there's a lot of nuance in a response to that question. Gender makes a really big difference. We understand that stalking isn't just based on crushes or romantic fixations. I think it's very important for faculty members and for educators to have a really clear understanding that while in the larger population of people, stalking crimes tend to happen most commonly among former intimates or people that had some kind of relationship prior to the stalking. When it comes to faculty members, there are a couple of research studies that have been done that are out there about faculty members being stalked. And what those research studies show, in one of them, was that of the 87 faculty members that came forward that have been stalked, 42% of them fell into the category of erotomanic obsessive delusional stalking. So while in the larger population, we have a situation where a lot of it's ex-intimate, there's a lot of assumptions that are made. The research shows that with faculties, they're actually not having relationships with their students as often as people sort of fantasize occurs, right? That's actually not the case. And for almost half of those people that were interviewed, granted it's a small sample size, but for almost half of those 87 faculty members, it was someone that imagined a relationship with them, asked for it. When they were turned down, continued to pursue it. And some of those people probably pressed charges, some of them didn't. And I have become a big fan of documentation. So if I could give some practical advice, it would be document everything, which we already hear from a lot of folks that have dealt with this kind of thing, but document it with the university. Even if you don't have the university take action, document it with the university at the very least. because there needs to be evidence of a pattern of behavior. And it's kind of like, we have an entire office on most campuses set aside for students who cheat and violate the code of student conduct by plagiarizing or cheating on tests. And we don't have a place for faculty to report to when there's student misbehavior. And so, other than talking to the Dean of Students office, and the Dean of Students office handles 10,000 different things on campus. And so I think that there need to be changes in both the legal system and also in the university system. Some universities have victims advocate offices on their campuses. My university does not. We have a victims advocate that's on a grant and she works for the police department. There's no office that anyone can go to that centralizes this stuff. I think that one of the things that's really important is, as faculty members, we try so hard to be empathic and connect with our students. In fact, being an excellent teacher is connected with your ability to connect with and engage with students in a meaningful and appropriate way outside of the classroom. And so because of that, we often try to find ways to do that, and that's what makes our work fulfilling to us. And I would encourage any faculty member who's had inappropriate and unwanted advances from a student to trust their instincts. If it feels creepy, don't think it's just a mixed up kid. Trust your instincts. And so I think a lot of things that apply outside of the university do apply in the university setting as well. But he shouldn't be able to start over. He shouldn't be able to apply to a new university and not have this follow him. He shouldn't be able to go to another state completely, do this with another person, and have there be no pattern. There needs to be some kind of system in place where this follows him in the same ways that he's followed me. And I feel very strongly about that.
How do you think that universities could do a better job?
I think universities, so at most universities around the country, there is the Clary Report, which is a report of all crime that happens on university campuses, and universities are required to report certain crimes, and each year the annual report comes out. Some universities notify campus members, the campus community, when a crime happens right away. Others wait until the annual report comes out. But that's really the only, as faculty members, that's the only thing I knew about coming in that detailed anything to do with student misbehavior on campus. Students follow a code of conduct, and a lot of times university campuses will encourage students to follow the code of conduct process instead of reporting to police departments, because if they follow the student code of conduct, it doesn't necessarily have to go in the report. And so I think universities need to do a better job of being transparent. I don't think all universities operate that way, but there certainly are some that do, in an effort to sort of hide student misbehavior on campus and student stalking other students, student stalking faculty. I was very lucky that my institution was willing to say, whatever you need to feel safe, we're going to give it to you. For this, and I didn't feel judged, though they did all think this was a person I had a relationship with, and I had to tell every person, no, it's not my act. I did not have a relationship with this person. So that's one thing. The other thing is faculty members get tons and tons and tons of training about how to be a better teacher, about how to be more empathic and understanding and supportive for our students, about the plethora and multitude of resources that are available on college campuses for free for students who are victims of crime. We get no training about what to do and how to manage student illegal behavior towards faculty members. So we'll hear about student incivility in the classroom. What do we do when a student won't stop interrupting other students? So there's no conversation about what do you do as a professor when a student asks you out? What are the university policies about that? They defer at every university. In some places, there's no problem with that. In other places, it's against the rule, and there's code of conduct that's been violated. And so I think when it comes to these kinds of crimes, there needs to be a standard. But I'm not sure that can happen on university campuses until it happens nationwide, that there's a national standard and that it doesn't vary by state. So I think training for faculty is really, really important. Training about the risks and about warning signs for student misbehaviors. That when you have a student in your office crying, because I can't tell you how many amazing, bright, challenged students I've had in my office crying. Nobody tells you it could come to this. And I feel like if I'd been a little more prepared, I might have actually filed for a restraining order the second it happened. rather than thinking that the expulsion was going to be enough. Because I thought, well, they threatened to kick him out, and surely no one wants to get expelled from school. He's going to stop. And then that didn't work. And so it was, well, there's a restraining order, and surely, he doesn't want to go to jail, so that's going to stop. And then I got another one, and then he violated it. And I thought, okay, now this is stalking, and he's escalating his behavior. And nobody prepares you for that. And I get why they don't. You don't want to panic people. And no university wants to be affiliated with the program that trains faculty about how to manage students stalking them. But it's a conversation that has to be had. And it's not being had. It's not being talked about. Faculty members, a lot of them feel ashamed. I've heard from a couple folks across the country at universities who have been stalked by their students, and they didn't have tenure yet, they didn't have that job security yet, and they didn't feel like there was much they could do. The student accused them of impropriety. I at least had in writing, I don't want to do this, stop now, right? They just had conversations with the student, and then the student accused them of things. And so there's a lot that happens. And I think the biggest thing is we just want what's best for our students. Most people don't get into education because they hate students. They want to help students. They want to see students thrive. And so we really, a good professor jumps at the opportunity to serve and help their students. I hate that for me, this has made me a little bit more hardened. I'm more reticent now to help students that are in need. I still do, but I am very aware of my movements and very aware of behaviors. And I think conversations about this happening more broadly in academia and at universities around this country will help to highlight and also make it more stigmatized for students to be pursuing their faculty members in this way if the faculty member doesn't want it. So there's a lot that could happen.
How has this experience changed your life?
My friends used to tease me. They'd send me text messages like, come to the dark side, be a little less nice, be a little less whatever. And they would tease me about it because I used to just think that everything was so good, I had a rough go of it in my 20s, some really bad situations that I had gotten out of. But when I was doing my PhD, I was in my early 30s, and I just was starting over, and I was so excited, and I'm a little harder now. And I still strive to be the best educator that I can, the best colleague that I can, but I have to devote a portion, if not frequently, at least once a year until now that the restraining order is ending, I have to devote a portion of my time to this person that's not entitled to it, and that never was. And the fact that he is using the things I researched to try and reach out to me, or has done that previously, it just makes me not even want to talk to students about the things I research. So I battle those inner demons frequently. And I've decided that in an effort to be the best professor I can be for my current students and all of my students to come, it's really important that I still give as much as I can, hoping for the best of intentions from all of them. But I do have that little voice in the back of my head now that says, something's not right about that person. And I listen to it.
Where is your stalker now? Do you know?
So last check, he was still up in Wisconsin with his parent, or one of his parents. So that's the last I know of his whereabouts.
What would you prefer to see happen to him?
This is really where I struggle. Because, I want him to get mental help, like I said. I think he had some manic episodes there, and I think I want to know that he has gotten mental health help, and I want him to be rehabilitated. I also want there to be a record that follows him that isn't just a private civil matter where there's an arrest record of contempt of court, right? There's nothing about stalking or harassment or student misbehavior. And I feel like there needs to be a pattern. I'm reticent to talk about any kind of stalker registry because I've known victims that have behaved in ways that they really wouldn't do under normal circumstances when they've been under duress in a bad relationship. And so I have concerns that if someone gets convicted of stalking wrongfully. But at the same time, this guy should not be able to do this to anyone else. He just shouldn't. And people should be able to know that he did this to me. And so maybe the stalker registry is the answer. But more than anything, I want to know that he has had help and that he is a functioning person.
And you've really turned this around, and you now volunteer a victim's advocate for your local rape crisis center, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do.
Why is that important to you, and how does that help you?
I am in this really unique space as a victim, and I don't call myself a survivor because I've not survived him yet. I don't know when he's going to show up here again. And so I still consider myself an ongoing victim. And so I am in this really unique privileged space where I've been around the block. It's not my first rodeo with life challenges, though the stalking is new. And so I am a highly educated middle-class woman that has a voice and a platform and has the ability and honestly the social power to exact change and to be able to assist other people in their times of crisis. And for me, being able to do that is giving back a little bit to the folks who helped me along the way. And it's also a place where I feel like I can use some of the things that I learned, not just to sort of reify, academia and the university scholarly space that's kind of this other part of society, but where I can actually take the things, the skills, the theories, the things that I learn about, teach about. I can take the things I learn from my students every semester about life, about their relationships, about their communication. And I can help a person that may not have access to that. And even if they do, may not be in a place to use it, to dig deep in themselves and find the things that they learned in school or other places. And I can help them as a completely objective person. I'm not with the police force. I'm not with the hospital. I'm not with any branch of law enforcement. I am literally there for the victim to make sure they know what their rights are. And for me, that's empowering. And so it benefits me as much as I think having an advocate benefits victims in their times of crisis.
Can you tell us about interstate harassment and stalking and what you're doing to bring more attention to the issue?
Well, right now I'm not doing enough because I have written to all of my local officials. There's not much I can do as a person in another state here in South Carolina. So I've written to my local officials and none of them have responded to me. So I decided, you know what? I am going to, rather than hoping someone will read my story and want to draw attention to this and want to change interstate stalking laws, I'm going to research the heck out of this, and I'm going to try and conduct some research and write that research up and get published in an academic journal for it. And I do have a publication coming out next year about my experience as the victim of an erotomanic and obsessive stalker, delusional stalker. And my hope is that other people will see that and connect. What I want to see happen with interstate stalking laws is it's not okay that he got to start over here. It's not okay that the pattern of behavior has to happen in South Carolina for it to be a pattern. And it's not okay that he had a pattern in South Carolina of violating a restraining order against me and still had no criminal charges even filed against him. And that's because he never threatened violence. And that's not okay, because violence is in and of itself traumatic. But the psychological damage that comes from constantly having to look over your shoulder, constantly hoping you're doing and saying the right thing so that you're not making a mistake, constantly having to research. I get to research for a living about this stuff. Other people have other full-time jobs, they can't do that. And so there needs to be more support. And I will say that specifically in the state of South Carolina, we are not a victim-friendly state. Actually, someone at the courthouse told me when I was applying for my restraining order, I said, so I only get it for a year. Yep, that's the best we can do. Well, what happens if he doesn't violate the restraining order? Well, then, you just, if he does it, if he contacts you afterwards, you apply for a new one and we'll see what things look like then. And I remember saying, so I just have to go unprotected. You're telling me I just have to go unprotected. And this was when I first applied here in South Carolina, not later when I said that again. And the clerk of court told me, look, here in South Carolina, we don't infringe upon people's freedoms willy-nilly. Like, he needs to threaten violence. He needs to really do something to you for us to infringe on his right to be and move and engage where he wants to be doing that. And if he's not bothering you, then it shouldn't be an issue. And I thought, okay, now I know what I'm dealing with. And the bottom line is, somebody needs to pay attention. This has to stop. The psychological damage to people that don't have the resources I had to be in therapy, to get the counseling I needed, to find creative outlets, to help and serve others. This has to stop happening. I think about the 19-year-old that doesn't know what the heck they're doing with their lives, and then this happens to them, and they just have to try and manage the legal system as though they know something about it. And so we need to see patterns established on a national level when interstate stalking has occurred. I think in every state in this country, if someone has engaged in stalking or harassing behavior in another state, that should count in the history in the new state. And that's what I was trying to reach out to my local officials about.
What advice do you have for other people? What helped you the most to get through this?
My husband and my friends, my close friends that are part of my support in this. I think without them, I don't know what I would have done or where I would be. And they were able to identify stuff and say, no, you're thinking about this like a teacher, and this guy, you found out he's not a student. This is stalking. Got to do something about this, and those people in my life have really been incredibly supportive, and they're the reason that I can sit here and talk about this now. And so I'm very grateful for them, and my family, of course, too. But yeah, especially my best friend and a couple of my colleagues here that have gone to court with me here in South Carolina, my best friend in Wisconsin, my husband, they've been amazing. And I really feel for folks that don't have that kind of support.
What advice would you give to a student who was feeling these obsessive thoughts about a professor?
Oh, that's a great question. So I'm not convinced a student would tell a faculty member if they were feeling these kinds of obsessive things about another faculty member, though I do know of someone whose student talked to them about not being able to stop contacting another student. I think my immediate reaction would be to walk them to counseling services and to tell them that it's free. It's important for them to go talk to someone about it, because most obsessive behavior doesn't just happen overnight. It doesn't just, most people aren't sociopaths. Something usually triggers things. And so I think that I would need to separate myself from that person and make sure that they're getting the help that they need on campus. If they've reported a crime to me, I am a mandated reporter. And so if they tell me I've been stalking and harassing another faculty member, I have to report that. And I always let students know, if you're going to open up to me about something, please know I'm a mandated reporter. I don't have, you don't have to go seek help. You don't have to do anything if you don't want to, but I'm required to report this. So before you tell me, I want to make sure you know that.
And it is fairly easy on campus to get mental help.
So most university campuses, not all, but most of them do have student health centers. And so I always tell students, this may be the only time in your life that you get free access to healthcare, to counseling services. And I tell them, I see therapists. I haven't had my own set of things, but students have access to a lot of resources at many university campuses. Again, not all, but most do have student counseling services and student health services. For folks that are dealing with things in places where you don't have student counseling and health services, the Dean of Students office is a great place to start if you're dealing with an issue in your own life that's impeding your ability to study, engage in your classes, get your education. for whatever reason, you can talk to someone in the Dean of Students office and they can direct you to resources. The other place that people can often go for this would be women's centers on campus or women's and gender studies centers on campus. A lot of those places, anywhere that focuses on campus in the area of social justice and things like that, those are the spaces that, if your campus doesn't have counseling center, those are the spaces that would probably be the best bet. But counseling centers are made up of humans too. And so I think that until the law can really protect victims, we'll do what we can to keep bandaging the wounds and sending them back out into the world, able to hopefully thrive. But we need to see change outside the university as well for anything to trickle down into the university system. I've had so many people self-report to me, and we're just, sorry, I'm going to get teary. I'm sorry. We are just not doing enough. We're not doing enough for our students. We're not doing enough for our educators. And we're not doing enough for each other. And I'm very lucky to have worked in spaces where people went above and beyond for me, but everyone doesn't get that. I would love to be put in touch with folks that you've heard about that are working on anything. If there is a way for me to not just lend my voice, but to lend manpower to other things that are happening, that's something that would be great. I appreciate what y'all are doing. I appreciate that there's a platform for this kind of stuff, because the legal system gets to decide what constitutes a pattern. They get to decide what constitutes fear. They get to decide what constitutes a lot of things. And the fact that you guys are giving space for victims to say, wait, it's just not matching up. The legal system and victims are not matching up. It's really important. So thanks to you guys for that. And I don't want to take too much of your time. But
Cassandra, thank you so much for joining us today.
thank you so much for having me here and for the work that you're doing.
If anyone out there is in need of help or is a victim of stalking, please reach out. You can find a list of resources on our Instagram at Strictly Stalking Pod.
If you'd like to share your story with us on Strictly Stalking, you can reach us at strictlystalkingpod@gmail.com. That's strictlystalkingpod@gmail.com. You can watch our episodes on YouTube at youtube.com/strictlystalking. And I'm Jake Deptula.
And I'm Jaimie Beebe. Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Strictly Stalking.